one of the agendas that we have been working on for the last few years has been around sustainable mobility, and walkability came out of that particular interest area. And specifically in Bangalore, we have in the past worked on a project called Walkable Malleshwaram. We worked on in another neighborhood called Dodnakundi in Bangalore. We worked with SUMA, which is the Sustainable Urban Mobility Accords, which was a program, community level program on making neighborhoods sustainable with the state agency here called DULT. And sort of through a lot of experiments, we've actually launched Walkable Bengaluru, which has sort of come about after a lot of experimentation in multiple neighborhood scales, really to understand what is actually doable and how do we solve something that is so simple yet so intertwined with so many different agencies, so many private players, public players, all involved in it. So how do we sort of solve for this issue in a simplified manner? So today's agenda is basically to be able to introduce and set the context, which is what I will sort of bring forth. We will delve a little deeper into the Walkable Bengaluru study. The reason we're doing this is we are actually trying to draw a strong correlationship between addressing the issue of parking and walking itself that's there, as we have found actually parking to be one of the largest inhibitors to walking through our study that we have done in Bengaluru. So the reason for us also to do this webinar is to say that actually it's not just about fixing the footpath, but after fixing the footpath, also you have so many other issues that come in, and parking is one of those issues, right? So how do we sort of delve into that? We don't have a solution, which is why we have invited Abhijit, Reashma, and Sonal to really discuss their projects and their experiences in Surat, Coimbatore, and Delhi. So really it is for us to be able to set some context. I'm sure the issues are very similar across multiple cities, which is why all of us are also here, and we have probably faced it in our day-to-day experience as well of just using our cities. But really to see that where can this be solved and how can it be solved? Is it community-led? Is it government-led? Is it at the policy level? Is it at an area planning level? How really can we address all of these complications? We will, after the presentation, which will be around 10-15 minutes each, we will actually go into a panel discussion with Q&A. So we will not take questions immediately after each of the presentations. I'd like you all to sort of keep it towards the end, even if there are questions that you want to ask. But largely, we are trying to try and keep the focus to the correlation of parking and walking, and how parking can then be addressed, taking that as a driver into the way it encroaches our cities. I'm Sobia. I'm the co-founder of Sensing Local. I welcome all of you, and I hope you enjoy this webinar as much as we do actually organizing these webinars. I welcome Abhijit, Reashma, and Sonal. Thank you so much for joining us, taking out the time, and actually wanting to share your thoughts and insights. I really, really appreciate your time. So I'm going to get started about Walkable Cities. So Walkable Cities is a national initiative that we have launched as Sensing Local. The goal of this is basically to conduct walkability audits and generate data-led budget estimates that can help government prioritize spending towards pedestrian infrastructure for maximum impact. So our goal has largely come from the perspective that actually everything does not need to be made walkable. Every street does not need to be made walkable. But can we then translate that very quickly by prioritizing certain streets and push towards where the maximum impact can be felt? So of course, like I said, 2 years back, when we initiated the work, is where do we start, right? That was one of the main sort of investigation into actually saying, can I fix for walkability in my city? Can we fix every footpath on every road due to especially road widths that are very, very limited and budget constraints? Footpath upgradation, as we noticed, it was extremely fragmented. So there was literally certain roads that got done, other roads that got left out. There was no continuity that was there within the footpath itself. There's a middle child syndrome. So private and public actors like dumping on footpaths, right? So it's nobody's land, right? Nobody sort of takes ownership of saying, I will clean the footpath, I will not throw waste on the footpath, I will not use it a certain way. So it inevitably not anybody's in the aspect, even though it is public infrastructure. Walkable Bengaluru was actually a pilot program The reason we sort of pushed this forward is that we said we want to do at least 19 to 20 wards roughly. It was completely community driven. And we sort of did these audits at every weekend, basically with a whole set of volunteers. So we covered around 350 kilometers of footpaths, 185 junctions, and around 150 plus volunteers who were trained to actually do the audits. We from there got actually a very interesting blueprint on how walkability can be achieved, and that's what I will take you guys through. So this was roughly the distribution of the wards. So we took a combination: commercial, residential, inner wards, outer wards. We also looked at industrial wards. So there was a good sample set that we looked into to see whether there anything that is underlying in all of these wards together. Our components of this audit is we took a strategic approach. So we first identified what we call a priority walking network, which basically means that if a ward has 30 kilometers, we're saying don't fix all 30. Most people will be using maybe 15 kilometers out of that for walking. We'll focus on that 15. And even in that 15, probably there will be a percentage that will already be in good condition that we don't have to touch. But the one that is in bad is what we want to go and audit. We also did comprehensive audits. So we looked at a simple form, but covering multiple parameters that also provides high accuracy and high ownership of a particular issue that we are capturing. We also then use this data to generate budgets. So we did budgets according to the SOR, which is our schedule of rates that we have here in Bangalore. So that immediately after I collect the data, it goes through our tool, and then it also gives you the budget on how much money is required to solve for that particular or improve that particular footpath. The final thing that we did is we actually used this data to create local projects. So whether we look at pedestrian streets, whether we look at public space development along the way, all of these are things that we looked at in terms of local projects. The key factors of this particular study that we did, it was we basically took around 4 hours for one ward to do the audit and generate the budget. It was usable by citizen volunteers and government officials alike. And what we have is ready for planning. Basically, the data that is there is ready for planning and budgeting. So this is just an example of one of the wards where we said that, okay, 26% of the road network that exists in this particular ward is the priority walking network, of which we audited just 15%, which we thought were in bad condition. And then we go about mapping these issues, which to every point that was collected, point or line, there was a image that was mapped to it. So image as well as a few attributes that were mapped to it. The issues that we collected range from footpath quality, waste, encroachment, obstruction, unsafe areas, injunctions as well. We had 7 parameters that we looked at: infrastructure, we looked at on-ground experience of safety. So overarchingly, we had multiple parameters that we looked at. And one of that, what we're talking about is a deep dive into encroachment, and from within encroachment into parking. And that's what we'll be focusing on in today's discussion. I'll skip over this. This is basically saying on what all it can influence. Of course, parking plans is one thing that we would like to influence using this. We've got a data dashboard. So if you are, I think Naveen can drop the link as well on the website. So if anyone's interested in further looking into this dashboard, the data, wanting to use the data, wanting to analyze and find insights, whatever it is, you're free to do so, as well as if you want to collaborate on anything or do anything further, we are all ears as well. If you want to volunteer for audits or nominate a particular ward, we are also trying to sort of collect demand, because we do realize that this is something that is an issue that's close to a lot of people as well. So if we do want to collect demand and then see how we can start addressing it in a much more formal way, where we collect a few wards and then start funding that process. If you want to also share your experience of walking in the city, it'd be great. We're collecting that insight as well. I'm going to jump into parking and walkability. This data effectively is where I would lay the context to some of the questions that we have found through the data. And I'm hoping that through the speaker presentations as well as the panel discussions, we are able to find some semblance of even strategic directions that can be taken in order to address this issue that we find. So one of the largest inhibitors to walking, of course, has been parking. It is encroachment actually was our second largest inhibitor as a whole. Encroachment meaning parking planters as well as vendors and shops that you're seeing here on the left. Within that, 40% was caused by parking. That's around 19.2 kilometers that we were looking at. So that is still a fairly large number. We also wanted to understand within this subset that was there, where was this encroachment happening and why was it happening, right? So we realized that actually in Bangalore, since we do not have a master plan, so there's been an absence of a master plan, there has been actually a lot of haphazard development resulting in a lot of mixed-use areas that have popped up. And what that means is a lot of residential areas have also converted to commercial in a very informal manner. So there's been no controlled development. A lot of residential areas are also seen to be in smaller, sort of smaller roads that are there. So they're not on your larger roads. So you see that 72% of parking encroachment that we are seeing is actually on streets with high footfall, that is mixed and commercial land use. So you see that's 39 and 33%. So that was one of the key findings, where I'm also going to have high footfall here as well as high traffic component over here. In all the three cases that you see here, that is in terms of mixed commercial and residential, where we find parking as an encroachment, 54% of this is actually occurring in minor roads. Minor roads are roads where the end-to-end, extra end-to-end is less than 12 meters. So these are your smallest roads that you have in our cities after intermediate. So we also do acknowledge the fact that they are happening firstly in a very haphazard manner, mixed use being the highest, as well as they're happening in places where the road widths itself aren't sufficient to accommodate that kind of land use that exists. Next. So then we go into actually the land use change. What we see also is that within this particular sample set, so we sort of did another deep dive into these minor roads. And what we understood is for mixed, so you will see the top bar graph, which is the mixed bar graph, almost 66% of the minor roads with mixed land use, even the footpath width is insufficient. So it's not even up to our 1.8 meter mark. So as you see in the images around here, your footpaths are barely 1, maybe 1.2 at the most, very uneven. So it's like you would find it in a residential area. And that has been overtaken by parking because anyway, the road itself is fairly small and narrow. So you'll see this one along residential, along mixed. We have this, which is along commercial. So all these cases you're seeing where these minor roads itself have insufficient footpath width. So for walking, firstly, there is no problem, no space at all. So in all of these, you're noticing that actually people are walking here, footpath is being used by parking. So in such a case, how do we actually look at solving for something like this when space itself is not available? In commercial areas, in fact, the norm that we work with is 2.5 meters. So in commercial also, we notice that 2.5, actually 60% of the roads with commercial land use within the minor also have insufficient footpath width. So they don't even have the 2.5 meter width that's there, right? So we are already struggling and in a fight with our footpath, which is this fight for pedestrian infrastructure and parking infrastructure. But the land use does attract a lot of these activities, which actually needs parking to be there. The next deep dive that we did is we actually looked at multiple trip attractors and the component of temporal parking. So we realized that a lot of the encroachment from parking is because of religious institutions, educational institutions, and obviously commercial activity that exists. But at this moment, I would really like to bring our attention to religious and educational institutions. The reason for that is that both in religious and educational institutions, we definitely find that, yes, again, here, there's minor roads forms a very large category. But the important aspect is the fact that both parking and footfall over here are temporary and time sensitive. So the moment that it is school timing, it becomes a chock-a-block area, or it is an particular timing for a festival, or the temple timing, or prayer timing for the mosque, or anything like that. It definitely becomes clogged up. So this is something that we have noticed as well. So what actually results in when you have certain kinds of trip attractors, again, majority of them on minor roads. Again, what we try to understand is 60% of the footpaths in these minor roads do not have sufficient footpath width. So it's not even within your 1.8. meter width that we have for the footpath. So again, these images that you see here are indicative of exactly that. I will sort of leave us with the questions and let it dwell on in terms of what we are thinking about. And as we go into the presentations, also sort of see how we can maybe, I think this is to the speakers, if there's some correlationship that's already there, if it'll be great if you could point it out, but we'll anyway discuss these at the end of the presentations. So one of the first questions we are trying to place and investigate is to say that a lot of roads that attract parking are linked to trip attractors, which are largely located on minor roads with insufficient width. In such cases, how does one negotiate parking? The second is when reorganization of space does occur on a particular street, especially when you come into area level parking plans, how does pedestrian infrastructure weigh in terms of priority to, allocating space for parking? Is it evaluated? Is it not considered? Is it ignored? Is it taken into your total calculation, saying that, okay, I will readjust pedestrian infrastructure and then go about doing the rest? How can temporal parking be addressed? That's been another question again that our data has thrown out. And finally, and I think this comes more from a Bangalore perspective, because we do not have a master plan. City mobility plans to some extent, but they don't cover parking entirely. So what then becomes the role of a parking policy? Because we have found that a lot of the roads that we had looked at as our priority walking network, from the Bangalore parking policy and the parking plans, actually get left out. They get left out because of the mere nature of that, they don't have space for parking. But how does that get addressed in something like a parking policy or parking plans, especially when you do not have master plans that are controlling things like land use and trip attractors that are coming up in these locations? So I would actually bring in our first presentation. And I think just for us all to understand as well, the way we have lined up these presentations is that we will first look at Urban Lab, and we will, just a second. Yeah, we will look at Urban Lab and we will look at their presentation, because it's largely around parking policy, master plans, and how do you look at it from the top-down perspective. The Racecourse Neighbourhood Coimbatore is a project that we know is being led by the government, really pushing to be able to do an exercise like this at an area level. And what is being covered by CSEC and Sonal is actually looking at a community-driven approach towards area level parking management plans. So I think the structuring of it also comes from a perspective of scale and getting into who's leading and deriving this. Abhijit, if I can request you to take the floor, and if you can share a screen, I'll stop sharing mine. We can see your screen, no?
Yeah.
Even in the presentation mode, we were able to see it.
Okay. So am I visible and am I audible? Both.
Yes, you're visible very much and audible both.
So yeah, thanks for inviting me, first of all. And I think it was a very interesting perspective you brought on Bangalore. And it got me thinking actually, because I have never thought of parking and relating it directly to master plans. That's a new perspective for me. And I was thinking, even as you presented, whether really a city with a master plan, let's forget a good and bad master plan, but a city with a master plan, does it have better parking practices? Or does it have better parking practices that lead to better walkability?
Okay, that's interesting.
I thought about it and I figured out not really. I mean, I know that Bangalore is really suffering in its planning because of the way planning happens. I do some work in Bangalore and I know how bad planning is.
Yeah.
right? How new roads are carved out, how land uses come up has absolutely no logical basis.
Yeah.
And I come from Gujarat, where there is the development plans prepared every 10 years. There are town planning schemes which happen at level 2. Gujarat actually promotes a lot of mixed land use. Uh, and the parking problem is as bad as Bangalore.
Still exists.
I don't see any difference in.
Okay.
So I do see the fact that roads are narrower in Bangalore, which means that the parking problem kind of becomes worse when there is a lot of parking. But really, this photograph is from Ahmedabad, so I mean, we are no better off than what you are, right? As far as relating
I don't know
master.
whether to feel happy or sad about it.
I see it. So the larger point that I'm driving to here is uh, parking for a lot of time was thought of as an infrastructure issue where the supply had to be met, and local governments would kind of do everything possible to ensure that more and more parking is made available. For a long time, the discourse was that the supply needs to be increased. There is some thought on maybe that's not the right way, but as I said, still many cities follow this supply philosophy. And I slowly, as I work on these issues, I am strongly believing that parking is not a planning or an infrastructure issue. And I'm sure there will be a lot of questions on this statement. But I really believe that parking is now more of an economic issue, something that has to be dealt with by looking at it through the economic lens. Also by looking at it through behavior change lens. It doesn't matter what kind of plans your city has or does not have. Beyond a certain point, policies do matter, but beyond a certain point, it still matters about what can you do to change the psychology or behavior of people. So having said all of that as a response to what you have just presented, let's get to Surat, where in 2016, I worked with the municipal corporation to prepare a parking policy. A parking master plan was also prepared. Basically, this was a joint effort by the Urban Lab and UMTC. So we worked more on the parking policy. UMTC worked on the parking plan. Let's call it the parking master plan because that was part of the requirement from the city. So just quick look at what is the present state of parking. A lot of people still believe that parking is a right. And because we people work in this field, we kind of now know better. But if I'm sure if you talk to people who are not in this field, your friends, your family, they will all believe in this. That parking is a right and the government must provide parking. And government must provide parking and the government itself believes that it is their duty to provide parking. I have led a lot of parking workshops where this is the first question I ask, and most government officers believe that they have to provide parking. It is a duty. Which is very interesting. The way this has kind of seeped into cities. And that's why cities are mass producing parking spaces, more and more of multi-level car parks. And in fact, many cities are actually incentivizing private developers to provide more and more parking. And there are a lot of examples. I'll not go into those examples right now, but this is what is happening right now. Yet, we still have these issues. This is Surat. This is the ring road in Surat, and image is taken from top of the flyover, and you can see what kind of parking requirements are there. You will see perpendicular parking. You will see a lot of freight vehicles being parked, and below these flyovers also you have paid parking. So Surat actually has a lot of parking provided by the municipal corporation. They also have 11 multi-level car parks, which I must say are managed quite well by Surat and built quite well. But still, Surat Municipal Corporation believes it's their duty to provide parking. In fact, in 2016, when we were asked to prepare the parking policy, the corporation came, or their belief was that you tell us how much more parking we need to provide. Tell us what is the gap in supply and demand so that we can start providing more parking. These are some more images from Surat. Again, you can see the footpath filled with motorcycles. We had done some studies on comparing Indian cities, and in terms of looking at percentage of habitable place where people stay versus parking area. In Indian cities, we provide a lot of parking, and this comes through parking minimums. The development control regulations say that you have to provide at least so much parking. You cannot provide anything less than that. And the parking minimums have been rising every time the development plan gets revised. So Paul Barter had come up with this very nice way of looking at parking. And he said that there are three approaches. One is the conventional approach, which most cities follow, where you have to ensure that supply meets demand, infrastructure supply has to be free. That was the catchword, free and in plenty, and it has to be provided by government. The management approach says that, okay, we have given enough parking. Let's see how we can make more efficient use of whatever is available. And we have to use policies as a tool to manage issues of transport policy and demand. And a more radical approach, which a lot of cities are now actually talking about, is market approach, where you actually use pricing as a tool to manage the market. You use pricing as a tool to change behavior, where parking is treated as any other commodity, and you actually use prices to manage the demand. Now, what approach did Surat take? So Surat actually started off by saying they wanted the conventional approach. Tell us where we want to have, where is the demand, where we can put more supply. And we started talking to them. Eventually, they settled somewhere on the management approach. They were still not willing to go for the market approach. So let's look at what Surat did in its parking policy. So one thing that we really pushed hard for is that all parking in Surat shall be charged. And we actually said, let's come out with a formula where the rates will be dependent on land value. So we said we'll use property tax as a proxy. We will use right of way as a proxy. So we say that the more the right of way, it means that the land value is higher. So the parking charges will be higher. The vehicle type, so the size of the vehicle will mean more parking charges. If you park longer, more parking charges. It will depend on the peak and off peak for parking. And we said that after a lot of negotiations, we said, okay, off-street parking rates shall be reduced by 15% from on-street parking rates. Now, we did push for this. Eventually, what Surat Municipal Corporation agreed upon was not something exactly like this, but they said we will have two rates. One is premium area and the other is non-premium area. That is how they are working it out right now. What is even more interesting in Surat is that the Surat Municipal Corporation said that we want to enforce parking in Surat. So legally, any vehicle that is wrongly parked can be clamped or taken away by the traffic police. Under the Bombay Police Act, under the Motor Vehicle Act, all the legal powers have been given to the police. Now, SMC was very clear that we also want to have this authority to enforce parking. And one of the first things that we had to do was to look at the legal provisions to be made. So under the GPMC Act of 1949, under Section 458, under a subsection, what Surat did is they formed a traffic cell. So they got this mandate that they could enforce parking. They formed a traffic cell headed by Director Traffic, and then they formed teams of traffic enforcement officers who could enforce fine, clamp, tow away, etc., etc. Now, because this was a legal or a statutory requirement, this had to be passed in the standing committee in the Surat Municipal Corporation, and then it had to be passed in the Legislative Assembly in Gandhinagar, which means that it had to be mandated by the state also. So Surat did this, and now this is being done in other municipal corporations in Gujarat. This is something which is a little unique about Gujarat. I don't think any other states have done this. Then SMC slowly started looking at more radical measures. So they said, okay, can we have a proof of parking? So any new vehicle purchase, the buyer has to submit proof that there is a parking space available within a 250-meter radius. And the onus was being put on the dealership that the registration can be done or deemed complete only if proof is provided. Unfortunately, this directive in the policy was not enforced or implemented by SMC. It is still there in the policy, but it is not really implemented. The next one was that they said we will encourage sharing of parking spaces. So one of the things that has come up in many cities now is that parking is a temporal issue in the sense that there is a high demand for parking during certain hours in certain locations. The same locations may be empty during other times. For example, in mixed land use, this becomes really important because if you have, say, the place that I am sitting in right now is an office building with 2 basements. And right in front of me is a residential tower, again with 2 basements, which is full at night, but empty during the day. And the opposite happens in the office space that I am sitting in, where it is full during the day and empty at night. So SMC said that let's encourage people to share parking so that office vehicles can park in residential areas during the day and so on. A concern that came up here was security, whether residential areas would allow commercial vehicles to be parked in their parking space during the daytime and so on. So this has actually been left to the market to work out. It is being done in a few areas in Surat. It is being done in a few areas in Ahmedabad too, where I am from, where government buildings are being used for parking at night and so on. So this is something that I believe can come up in a big way if some kind of incentive is offered to private property owners to start sharing their parking spaces. Parking permits was something that also came up where you carved up Surat Municipal Corporation into parking districts, where then you could purchase parking permits either 6 months or annually. And these were offered at subsidized rates compared to the hourly parking rates. Another innovation, this was very strongly recommended by the municipal commissioner in Surat. Can you link your insurance premiums to parking violations? So if you violate any parking policy directive, your premium will be increased. Again, this has not happened because they would have had to have negotiations with insurance companies about this. So this remains as a directive in the policy, but not really implemented. But I believe this is something that can be looked at. Now, Surat has a master plan, which you were talking about earlier, but I don't think the master plan actually had any influence on whether the parking is better or not, what is happening around parking. Because I think parking is linked to many other factors. For example, the availability of public transport, the parking charges themselves, any other transport demand management measures. What Surat Municipal Corporation was very clear was that they wanted a parking master plan to be done by the consultants. And what the consultants or what UMTC had come out with at that time was not a very comprehensive master plan. They said, okay, we'll divide up the city into some areas. So they said, okay, there is a CBD, that is the old city of Surat in the center. There is a certain road which takes off from the CBD called Gordod Road. So that becomes a CBD. Then all the BRT corridors, high mobility corridors come under the mobility corridor. Then you have industrial areas and everything else came under residential areas. So that is how the master plan for parking was done, where you have these 4 clear areas. And for each area, and I'm not going to get into details of each, but each area then had very clear-cut strategies. And then for each area, for example, this was done for the high mobility corridor around the railway station. There was some basic counting done, surveys done to understand what is the supply. And based on that, then the gap was found out, and then there were some suggestions given for what could be the supply. This was not a very detailed master plan, and it did not really work in Surat. I was fortunate enough to work over the next 2-3 years. I think in 2018 and 19, I worked with CEPT University on preparing a master plan for Bhubaneswar. And I think Sonal's presentation will also talk about area master plans. I'll skim through this very quickly. What is very important in Bhubaneswar was how they linked the area master plan to the plans and policies. So it started off with the comprehensive development plan, and it was linked to the draft parking policy. And under that, they actually came up with their area master plan. what needs to be done when you do a master plan? You need to figure out what is the supply infrastructure, what is the demand, what are the current practices, how is it enforced, what is the NMT and PD infrastructure? I think very critical, especially given today's context about walkability, and who is going to enforce the institutional aspect. So a few slides quickly on how do you demarcate areas, how do you actually proceed, and this is actually a very small insight into what Bhubaneswar did. The actual work is much larger than this. Find out what is the transit network, look at the land use, and then come up with what is your area boundary. Based on that, then you look at what is your bus routes, you look at what are your cycle routes, where are the segregated cycle tracks coming, where are the markets coming. So this is all baseline analysis that needs to be done. Where are the public bicycle stands located? Where are the parking lots located? You do all this baseline. You do a lot of surveys to understand the parking turnover, the utilization, the index, and so on. You figure out which areas are overutilized, which are underutilized, which are utilized only during certain times of the day, and so on. So you do all the analysis. You find out what is the average parking duration. And then you come out with certain strategies. You say, okay, no parking within 50 meters from major junctions. So you mark that out. 50 meters of transit, 200 meters of any existing multi-level car parking. Then, because there may be certain administrative reasons, no parking on the Sachivalaya and Rajpath Road. And then you identify where you can pay and park with high charges, because these are transit corridors. Where is parking permitted near schools, colleges? It certainly helped that Bhubaneswar has a very clear master plan. And then you get down into details like this. How should the design be? Where is the cycle track? How much is the footpath? And so on. So you actually, at the end, you come out with templates like this for each and every street in the master plan area. You develop sections for each one of them. So this is what Bhubaneswar did for two pilot areas initially. One was what I had shared, the other was near an institutional area. And then they looked at how we could fund this through municipal budgets, through councillors, through public-private partnerships, through creation of urban transport fund. Who would be responsible? So they had proposed a UMTA, it's still not there. The municipal corporation was responsible for implementation. The BDA was responsible for guidelines. The smart city for providing technology solutions, and enforcement went with the traffic police. I'll just end with a few insights on some other work that we had done in Surat a couple of years back, and this is where it comes to behavior. Somehow in parking, we are very reluctant to target behavior and use parking prices to target behavior. We had done some other work with Urban Works Institute on seeing how parking itself can become a private business. And as part of that work, we had done some surveys. And what we found out is that when the rate per hour for cars, for example, take a look at when it becomes 40 rupees per hour, you still have 55% people who are willing to pay that. As the rate goes up to 80 rupees per hour, you still have 38% people willing to pay. You can look at it in two ways. One is that there are a lot of people who are still willing to pay, which means that this is a good source of revenue, which can be put back into increasing non-motorized transport infrastructure in the same area. But it also means that you have 33% people who are willing to shift to autos and taxis, and 22% people who are willing to walk, take the cycle, or take the bus. And a few people, and this is very important, because a lot of time business owners believe that increasing parking rates means that people will not come. And you can see here that it is not really true. It's very minuscule percentage of people who don't come because parking rates are increased. So I think this is a low-hanging fruit which our cities can tap into immediately. If we have to convince our decision makers, we have to work on them from the revenue perspective. We had also looked at three distinct areas in Surat. One, Varacha, which is like a very dense old part of the city. Paladajan is a very new part where new TP schemes have come up. and the new textile market is a commercial area on the edge of the old city. And what this figure is very interesting, because what you see is in dotted is the actual supply, and what you see as bars is the demand. And you can see that off-street supply is quite high in all three locations. But if you look at Pal Adajan and new textile market, you will see that as the supply has increased, the demand has also increased. So there is a direct correlation between these two. Somehow we believe that increasing supply will be able to manage the demand. It doesn't work. Increasing the supply also starts increasing the demand, because parking supply is like a magnet. It creates its own demand. That is something that came out very clearly. Less supply, less demand, more supply, more demand. And the last one, we looked at what is the willingness to pay in areas with limited parking. So Varacha and new textile market, where parking was very limited, people are willing to pay more, which means that there is a substantial market for the private enterprise to get into the business of providing parking. This is something that was done as part of research for Shakti Foundation. So I believe the report will be out soon. It's an interesting study which you could look at. I'll end with this. And I think we'll take questions at the end, right?
Yeah, we'll do questions in the end. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Abhijit. I think some interesting points.
Put questions in the chat. I think on the
if anybody, we can take it towards the end, but anyone wants to put can do that as well. I think even I've noted out some things, and we'll definitely come back to it in the panel discussion.
Sure.
Reashma, Street Matrix, can I request you to share your deck? Am I pronouncing your name right?
It's actually
Reashma?
It's actually pronounced as Reashma, but I'm quite used to saying it as Reashma.
Yeah, because of your letter. Okay, done, Reashma. Sorry. Yeah, we can see your screen. You can do slideshow maybe.
Yeah, just a second. It's getting a little stuck. Just give me a minute.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, we can see it.
Yeah, thanks. So, shall I start? Is my screen
Yes, go for it. Yeah.
Am
yes,
I audible?
Yes.
Yeah.
Go for it.
Yeah. So, first of all, thank you, Sobia, Sensing Local, for giving me this opportunity. Very happy to talk about this particular topic of parking, and also extremely happy to be part of such a good panel where, we are seeing the works from different cities, and finally, you are bringing out all the works, different perspectives about parking, and podium, which has been, great. Such a huge, for the listeners, it's going to be a huge learning to make them to think from different perspectives. So kudos to you for that, and very happy to be here today. So, given the task to me, as you rightly made the right context in the beginning, like this parking management plans, people have been working in different views. So here I am going to brief more on the area level action plan. That is what has been, cities have been trying to do it, and Coimbatore city, that is what is one of the major thing they were when they approached us, they were asking like, how do we address this issue of this particular neighborhood, and this is what was their specific requirement. So I am going to talk about my experiences, the challenges, and what the lesson learnings through this setup of understanding the parking issues, addressing the parking challenges, working with the government, and finally, how do we shape like to solve this parking management issue for the area level plan? All right. So if we see the parking challenges in Indian cities, we heard many points from Mr. Abhijit. One point which I would like to start talking about is that parking, when we see, it's not about the space, it's not about the management. The first thing which we have to connect is that it's strong relation with its travel behavior, because he mentioned that as a socioeconomic activity. Yes, because the first question you think like, do we get a parking space over there? Then I take a car. So it is very much strongly correlated with the travel behavior. And city to city, we can see this variation as the land use changes, as the socioeconomic factors changes. This travel behavior and this strong correlation with the parking is also keep on changing. This is one thing we should keep in our mind. And what we see in Indian cities, especially the today's core is about linking parking and walking. I have taken, the couple of photos which has been trying to show the strong relation between these two. The one slide, which the two photos which has been appeared in your screen, one is from DB Road, Coimbatore, which has been under, recently redesigned street under Smart City. And the second one is from Bangalore, which is the Church Street. So if you see here, you can see like, okay, they have a wide carriageway, at least DB Road, Coimbatore, but you can see like everywhere encroached with the vending and parking, and that literally depreciates your streetscape, especially that walking comfort and walkability we are talking about, that is been like getting spoiled with the one element of your parking. And if you come down to the second one, that is the tender sure design guidelines, which has been implemented on Church Street, where you can see like half of your carriageway is been occupied with parking. So this is what at present we are seeing. I'm just talking about two different cities, how these issues have been. Now, both these streets shares a common nature, like they are very high land use, high commercial activities. Now, more than speaking in terms of qualitative, if you quantitatively put this data, how much is this is affecting in terms of its service level? So we have done some kind of a research to understand like how serious is this parking issues when it comes to the infrastructure. We have seen like, without parking, the two charts which is showing you here, which shows like one with on-street parking and one without on-street parking. So we can see like from level of service B, it has been going up to the level of service C and D. So parking is the one element which is literally reducing its service level, which has been quite clear. And that makes people to come out with a protest and demand for their space for walking, right? Now, so how do we solve it? We have been seeing different approaches also, a couple of points which Mr. Abhijit has already mentioned, but I'm just compiling it. As he said, like conventional approaches, like wherever more demand, providing supply over there in terms of the more, conventional way of considering multi-level car parking. That is not the right way of doing parking management. And because we have seen like even in MLCP, how, how much efficient it is, how much is the occupancy over it. You won't even believe when we surveyed a couple of multi-level car parking in Coimbatore city. The parking occupancy was seen quite low as a 10 to 15%. So that is what, with this huge infrastructure cost, and finally end of the day, its operations is been standing out with. And we have another approach which has been recently incorporating with all the streets design templates, like parking is been taken as one of the street design parameter. But the question arises here is that, are we actually understanding this street element of parking in terms of a space or in terms of its activity behavior? So what we observed is that most of the time parking plans have been retrofitting into your design templates. It is not getting integrated to mobility plans. So what do I mean by this? So here, I have more evidences from Bangalore to showcase it, because I've been working with all these street design templates for quite long years. So I'm showing you the one of the street design from Bangalore. So before street design, you can see like how the sidewalk, and you can see a series of parking. But after the street design also, even if you see the parking bay, you can actually see the constraint in the walkway space which they have kept for the pedestrians. So it's not about parking is treated, is been just a bay to be provided of 2 meter width. This is what is been more of a design practice which has been followed, but that is not even ensuring a good walking comfort and an good walkability. So the particular cases which I showed here, so you can see here, like without that street design, how much was the utilization of the street in terms of vehicles. So you can see like a two-wheeler and cars, what was a large number for one day, and in terms of its numbers. And that has been, reduced to a lot, in fact, into the 70 to 80% of it when you did the redesign. But again, the utilization or the management of the space as also a problem still was occurring. And again, the lack of the right design, understanding the parking requirements for the area, and neglecting even the pedestrian walkways and space was another concern. And still, this is the problem cities are facing now. Now we have examples from the world global practices, which has been telling us like how the reforms has to be taken care. It is not the conventional practices which really help us to solve it, but we should be going ahead with the parking reform. So our ultimate goal should be, or whatever the paradigm shift the cities have to change is like not increasing the supply, optimal parking supply, reducing the demand. These are a couple of things we should be looking at to address this problem, and finally look forward for like a shift to a public transport or low sustainable modes. So across the globe, we have different reformation. It is not just pricing is only reformation. We have many of the ways these reformation can be applied. And I'm just showing a snapshot like where all these parking reformation, this how it has been helped different cities, what was the impact assessment, everything is been detailed down. And Indian cities of late has been tried out with more like a parking space management with economic instrument of parking pricing. These have been taken as a tool to address this issue, and that is been seeing quite good results also. But we are in the nascent stage. That's all I would like to say. So what is that cities are practicing now is that like they are seeing the ultimate aim as a behavioral change to the sustainable modes. Moving from on-street to off-street is what is the agenda for us. And how do we do parking management to get this agenda is the steps which we have to think about it. So keeping the basic principles of like, provide on-street parking, but you make that, you make the space for priced and even keep the prices higher than off-street parking. Always understand the dynamics of your demand, monitor it, and slowly and steadily get that nudge that behavior to shift to the public off-street parking. This is what is the stage in which we have to work on. Now, we have like, so from the reforms, we have been clearly setting out our priorities are like road space, prioritize it for walkways, NMTs, public transport, prioritize your road space utilization. It's not like abundant supply of parking. There should be a reducing parking, optimal supply, and then slowly trigger this shift towards a sustainable transport mode. If this is the way any parking management action plan, if we are keeping as our benchmark or the baseline to work on, I think there we can address this issue. So how area level parking management helps is that it is a data driven tool for us, because we are taking out one area where we can map its land use activity, its travel pattern, commuting behavior of people, understand the strength and weakness of public transport, other modes, and how the parking dynamics of that area has been. So based on all these complete understanding, that is what I have been defining this as a strategic data-driven planning tool. And using this, we can lay out our own streetwise parking rules, design recommendations can be given, and effectively the management plans can be worked out. So, how do you, because in your area, it's not all streets are of same demand, or all streets are demanding for the same, or all streets can capable of accommodating the parking. So the identifying the street hierarchy, establishing the street hierarchy with the mobility, where parking can be given, where parking should not be given. These are the baselines which helps narrow down a plan to see and effectively accommodate the space as well as utilize the space. This is what the core of the area management plan. So I'm just showing you the one in which, like, one of the area plan where we can see actually like how that plan is working as a integrated mobility. You can see it's not just for two-wheelers or cars. We have cycle stands, we have shared mobility, we have auto rickshaw, loading, unloading zone. All these are important activities when it's coming to the a resident or a neighborhood. And that neighborhood is something, understanding is the base thing in which the area level plans will be based on. So this is a data-driven decision-making tool where parking rules and definitions will be coming, and then we will be taking out for its implementation. So here I'm going to show the parking management action plan for the Coimbatore neighborhood. So the city officials of Coimbatore.
Reashma, just checking on time. So you can wrap it up in 5 minutes. Is that possible?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, done.
So here I took more time on explaining the baseline, because that's the approach in which an area parking management action plan has been working on. So when we met the officials in Coimbatore, so they had this issue of like, we want to address parking in two of the neighborhood, taking the area level parking management action plan. And one of the road given to us was Racecourse. That is the first one. You can see it. Racecourse is a beautifully built up area which they have prioritized walking and cycling. And when you see in these photographs, you can see like how good is this space. But in reality, the space has turned over to this kind of a one, even affecting the walking, affecting more crossing of people, movement of vehicles, just because of the haphazard parking. So our approach was the same, whatever I explained so far. So we identified the street network. We had the review of entire area. You can see like everywhere how the vehicle ownership as the city has been seen increase, that has been affected on this kind of an issue, parking chaos. So we taken an approach to understand all these points of land use, street hierarchy, how the parking is right now, that the demand and supply correlation. And then based on that, we taken the steps. So all these are our survey studies. It was in detailed data-driven approach. So we have emphasized a lot more on understanding from the neighborhood level. So I'm showing you here how the street network has been defined. And if you see the infrastructure assessment, you can see like, how it is been varying. The right of way of the roads were not uniform. The infrastructure was not in proper place. You can even see 2-meter sidewalks at even some places. There was no sidewalk. There was even reduced to 1 meter. So we told the officials, and we were happy, like officials were understanding, like this should not be treated just as a parking management plan. It should be a mobility plan supported with the parking management. And that is what the benchmark we set on there. We identified the current footpath conditions, walkability. So you can see the the visual image here in which the broken lines indicates that, these are not even having a good walkable conditions. So those things we said, prioritize your sidewalks. We provided the street design as per the design, and then we looked into the commuting pattern of people. So we could understand, like, as the roads commercial values, activities have been changing, the mode used to access those roads are also been different. So here you can see mode access, car and bike are been highest. But when I say for the entire study area, you can see like some of the places, say for example, Government Arts College, Old Post Office Road, you can see more of public transport. So when you are providing parking plan also, it should not be like, it should be an integrated plan which works for the commuting pattern of the people. So you have to integrate IPT stands over there. That's the basic things which hints you like how do you design your allocation plan. And this was a place where we could even see 8,000 people walking on the sidewalks per day. So that was like a huge place where priority is obviously for the NMT. Then we did a detailed parking survey analysis. We mapped the influencers, major parking influencers, which attracts parking. We also studied its supply, and thanks to the government officials, like they often, issued notice to some of the places where if the too much of the demand is there, if they don't have parking management space, it's somewhere they started having discussions with them. We identified some of the private places where we can have a collaboration for the private parking and other things. So many of the other lateral points also came for, leveraging the space for parking. And this shows our detailed demand assessment for parking in terms of numbers, in terms of duration, occupancy, how it is been changing, which overall given us an idea, like whatever the 4 square kilometer area we have seen with a count of 11,000 vehicles. And in that 11,000 vehicles, how each road is being able to produce the demand, that is also been assessed. And from that, we have assessed the study area as a whole to categorize it as based on its density. And we categorize the entire neighborhood into the 3 different zones of like high density, medium dense, and low dense. This gives us an idea about how do you design your space. Then we laid our planning principles, which are the roads prioritized for NMT action plans. So all the roads we supported with the NMT action plan, and then supported with the parking, like how to provide it, to what extent the spaces can be given. And finally, we laid out our plan to the existing road street network. This is how we helped the people to look into it. I'm showing a 3D visual of like how with the parking, this street has to be performed. This is what is the way we have done. So I'll be showing you the final one, like what we have seen as the demand and what we have proposed as parking. So this is what the core point which I would like to say, like it's not the demand we are completely to meet when you even say area level management plan. We have to strategically think about like how do you address this, provide optimal supply, and even provide for all the modes, and so that it is not just being favoring only for your two-wheelers or cars. And finally, with the right pricing for this, and this is the management will come in. So you need all these economic instruments, the space instrument, everything is acted together in order to complete a parking management action plan. So we have done this opinion survey of pricing to understand from the people, and finally we gave reference for given them like what is the pricing can be kept in for the roads, and which with that we have introduced a differential pricing for based on the land use and land use economic activities of the streets which has been happening, and this is what is the final action plan. Yeah, so this is what is from my end. Thank you.
Thank you. I think made some very, very valid points, some questions and some answers as well. Sonal, over to you. Sonal, have you logged on? But I saw you. Yeah. I don't think we can hear you.
Yeah.
Can hear you. Yeah.
Oh,
yes.
Yes, I guess you can hear me now. All right.
Yes.
All right. So thank you, Sobia and Ankit, for having me here. And all right. So I'll just I'll explain the context within which this the parking management area plan was prepared. My colleague Aditya is also on this call. So we are part of the Sustainable Mobility Network, like Sensing Local, and we started this journey in 2021, where our objective was to demonstrate how the Delhi parking management rules, which were adopted in 2019, could be implemented. There were about 16 residential parking area plans that were prepared by MCD, and which were against the principles of the Delhi parking rules. So what I will do is, through the presentation, you will see how we've tried to, you'll see the principles in our presentation. So I'm guessing, just to introduce ourselves, we are from the Center for Sustainable and Equitable Cities, looking at three major SDGs, 5, 11, and 13. We are part of the Delhi Sustainable Mobility Network, but some of the partners are here. This is convened by Purpose and funded by the Urban Mobility Innovation Fund. So one of the things, what shaped our approach when we began to think about parking and parking management, because we see that when we look at India, we have about 900 kilometers plus of metro rail systems, 22 operational and under construction metro rail systems. Another 5 have been approved. We have about 300 kilometers of bus rapid transit systems, 12 operational BRTs, and I think we also have operational urban public buses. And yet what we find is that different initiatives kind of exist separately, right? So like I said, we have a metro rail system, and then a city will have a BRT, and then they'll have buses, and then we will think about an NMT network plan, and then the city also has TOD, and we are thinking about last mile connectivity. And while all of this is being, all these initiatives are being proposed, one of the big things that we are seeing currently, based on some of the data from some of our mass rapid transit systems, is that we are still not being able to achieve projected ridership, right? There are many reasons for it, and we can argue about that. And then again, we saw that over a period of 10 years, we had roughly the compound annual growth rate of registered motor vehicles increased by 10%. When we looked at Delhi, Delhi has the largest metro rail network in the country, and as of 2019-20, its ridership was 79% of projected ridership, and we still see that vehicle emissions contribute to more than 55% of PM 2.5 emissions. The Delhi government has so far built or redesigned 40 kilometers of streets in different parts of the city. And we were really beginning to think about how we could shift people's travel to mass transit and really begin to think about on-street parking management as a tool within the overall mobility system, so that it would in a way connect the dots, right? So how do we connect the supply infrastructure while considering demand management? And this is how we situated our approach to demonstrate the implementation of the Delhi parking rules. And therefore, what we decided is that we would prepare a PMAP around a mass transit station. And the photograph that you have over here is within 5 minutes walking distance of Green Park Metro Station. This is Yusuf Sarai Market. And you really see how the street space is used, and the vehicles also demonstrate how people commute to this area. So this became the starting point. So we took about 5 minute walking distance from Green Park Metro Station. And you see that this neighborhood has a variety of uses. Yellow is residential, mind you, red is actually commercial. So this is as per the Delhi master plan colors, but this is our ground study. Blue is public and semi-public use. So we used a 5-minute walking distance as our boundary for the PMAP, but being mindful of taking in certain land uses that came along the way. So for example, I'll just take a minute to show you. So while we have the metro station gates, I don't know if the yellow is visible, we also have a multi-level car park within 50 meters walking distance. There are 2 markets. It's called Yusuf Sarai, whose photograph you saw, as well as Green Park market as well. We have an educational institution called NIFT, and we have residential areas as well. Not sure, I'm not able to, let's see, just a minute. Sorry, my screen froze. I'm going to try again. Okay, yeah. So what was our methodology, right? The first thing we looked, did a literature review first of the parking policies in nationally in Delhi, the master plan of Delhi, good practices in India and globally, some of which has already been shared by Reashma. And then we began to look at the existing situation analysis. Because we were focusing on a metro rail station, it became very important for us to understand how metro rail users were using the street space. We did a survey with the people who were parking within this neighborhood, primarily 2-wheeler and 4-wheeler users, motorized vehicles. And we did an assessment of the pedestrian walking infrastructure as well. We did a very detailed analysis of parking behavior, especially through number plate surveys, as well as parking counts. And the number plate surveys were done for some of the major roads in the neighborhood, which were feeder roads to the metro station, as well as in and out counts through multi-level and surface parking lots. This then helped us analyze the ground data and come up with a set of recommendations which were used to have stakeholder consultations. And I'll also describe the journey of implementation for us as well. So the first thing that we did, like I have over here, is mapped the kind of parking that exists along some of the major roads in this area, because these were the feeder roads to the metro station. And what we found is that only 4 of the 11 road stretches, we divided the roads in road stretches, had paid parking, and the Municipal Corporation of Delhi was earning 13 lakhs per year through this. The ones that you see in red are the off-street parking facilities as well. So we looked at paid stretches, and we also looked at the orientation of parking, whether it was parallel, perpendicular, predominantly angular, and so on. Then when we began to do a survey of the metro users, we found that the mode of access and egress to the metro station, 70% of the users walked to the metro station, and often they were walking as far as 1.2 kilometers, right? So this was then followed by auto rickshaws, which could be both shared as well as individual. So these 2 were the main modes of transport to the metro rail station. But when we started talking to the PMV users, we found that it was very convenient to park, right, on the streets in the vicinity of a metro rail station, Some 87% of the respondents spent less than 2 minutes in finding a place to park, and they were parking about, again, another 74% for parking within 100 meters distance of their destination. But now we began to assess the impact, right, that this was having on the street space. And as you can see, both from the photographs as well as the street sections, we found that about 80 to 90% of the street space was occupied by vehicles. And Hukumchand Marg would be described as a collector street in the street hierarchy function. And so we did that for all the major roads in the area in order to understand what was the road space allocation between the carriageway, parking, and footpaths. And so you see one photograph where there is a footpath, but you see that the vehicles have just parked perpendicularly. And this photograph is actually very, very common in this area and as well. Now, what about the rest of the 10 to 20%, right? So similarly to the study done by Sensing Local, we looked at IRC 103 guidelines for pedestrian facilities, which recommend a minimum of 1.8 meters. I believe that has changed and it's increased to 2, but we took this at the time and we began to map where did we find this kind of walking infrastructure or this kind of network, and where were they discontinuous or less than 1.8. And so, you know, this is the example. So we had stretches where there were no footpaths, but then what about stretches that had footpaths, and how did parking impact the availability of street space for pedestrian infrastructure? So here again on Aurobindo Marg, where you just have about 1 meter, where we have 8 to 9 meters of perpendicular parking bays. In certain roads, this is a feeder road to the metro station. It's called Balbir Saxena. The width is there, you know, but what happens is that due to the presence of continuous HMV or trucks parking, this street or this footpath becomes very dark and unsafe in the night to walk on. So here, this is not so much a width issue, but how parking affects the quality of existing pedestrian infrastructure. Similarly, in another road, we found that continuous angular parking would simply impede your access to the footpath. So, you know, I feel that when we talk about the impact of parking, you know, while we look at encroachment, we should also see how the way that the orientation and the design of parking may restrict access to already available pedestrian infrastructure as well. We did, these are just some data around parking accumulation, and I will just try to show some, now what did we find? And very interestingly, I noticed both from Abhijit and Reashma's presentations about short-term parking, right? So what we found that while about 82% of existing demand was less than 2 hours, and 18% of on-street parking was more than 2 hours, right? And then we began to assess both the occupancy of on-street versus off-street. Like I had mentioned that we do have a multi-level car park in the vicinity. Our in and out counts showed that the MLCP occupancy was only 32%, so extremely underutilized. But when you see on-street parking occupancy, sometimes you'll find that it is overutilized as well. I'm going to point this thing out, right? That we found the peak demand for parking, right? And when we did this, we found that the peak demand was for the half an hour between 1 to 1:30, though you see that it peaks between 12 to 1:30 roughly. When we looked at the network level, and I think this is why it's important to have an area-based approach, we found that even if we had to convert and reorient perpendicular parking to parallel, while ensuring a good ensuring good walking infrastructure and factoring both, factoring on-street and off-street parking, the parking supply exceeded parking demand. Okay, I think it's and this is why I think a network level approach is important, because sometimes you may be able to redistribute demand when we take a network versus only looking at it from a road stretch perspective. And this was a big finding for us, because we also were surprised when we began to do this. And what we observed, that within this peak half-hour demand, we saw significant share of this was long-term parking. And for us, while the Delhi parking rules looked at 1 hour as anything above 1 hour as long duration, we considered 2 hours. And we saw that, the main road, Aurobindo, which is an arterial road, and all the other 3 roads that you see are all at the collector level. A majority of the demand was actually long duration parking, which, for example, could, through pricing and other strategies, be encouraged to move to off-street parking locations, so which already existed in the area as well. And so what we basically looked at about 6 entry points, and I'll go through them really quickly. The first thing is we looked at the street section, and we looked at ensuring a minimum level of service for pedestrian infrastructure, which determined the orientation of parking in the area. And we've also created an implementation plan, but I won't go into that detail as of now. And that helped us understand the orientation of on-street parking, as well as the number of bays available for each road. And then, I'm happy to discuss this issue of how to define no parking zones, but we felt that I think one of the ways in which we can explore enforcement is also through design. And so saying that how could we define no parking areas through design and through dedicated parking bays. And we were also very mindful that, we don't want continuous sea of parking. So we restricted that through 3 parking bays or 3 ECS, after which there would be a break. It could be landscape, but sometimes it could just, it could be landscape, it could be vending in other areas, and so on and so forth. Thinking also about universally accessible parking. And then introducing differential pricing between on-street and off-street, such that on-street parking could predominantly cater to short-term demand, whereas the long-term demand, which typically includes in commercial areas, business owners and employees. So, they will be parking for more than 4 hours in a day. And so that could, for example, be shifted to off-street parking. And in this case, if there is a partnership either with any commercial institution in the area, then, we can also explore shared parking so that they can have a predetermined set of users and, also gain some revenue, and that also frees up space on the street. We defined, and then the third piece we did was prioritize parking for non-motorized and shared vehicles, and we defined a base fee depending on the space occupied by the vehicle. In Delhi, it is generally 20 rupees per ECS per hour. That was taken as the base fee rate as X, and then it depended on the number or depended on the type of vehicle. Now, one thing that I really want to point out, which data really helped us, is that, typically cities charge parking by the hour, but when we realized that, the demand is actually, there's actually short-term demand, and in especially some of the market areas, the visitors were kind of fighting with the operators, saying that I'm only here for 15 to 20 minutes. Why should I pay for an hour? And, so what we decided was, how could we break the demand, break the pricing, so into 30-minute intervals up to a period of 2 hours, which would also encourage people to pay. And I think price can be discussed and negotiated with governments, but so that they would pay for the time that they were parking. It could be lesser, but we could, instead of starting at flat 1 hour rates, could the pricing be broken down into half-hour intervals up to 2 hours as well. And for us, the pricing strategy actually depended not so much on the right of way, but based on demand. And I think that this has been our approach, that if there is a way to categorize streets based on demand, this will really help us then determine pricing strategies as well. I think this is just
Sonal, just to check on time. 2-3 minutes, would you be able to wrap up?
Done. Sure. Yeah.
Thanks.
So I think we've just shown one street where earlier the municipal corporation was earning 13 lakhs a year. The estimated revenue from a revised parking structure would result in 10 to 19 crores per year. What were some recommendations regarding enforcement? I think Abhijit already spoke about Surat's case. Delhi is also contemplating that, in terms of they're making parking operators responsible for enforcement, in the sense that they report violations which get approved by the traffic police, and then they can impound the vehicles as well. The current violations only look at parking on the footpath, but we've also included parking outside designated areas and parking without paying as well. So a big case to be made, especially in neighborhoods, is parking fee, because there's a big opposition to pay for parking, is how this can be reinvested in the neighborhood. And also just coming to thinking about contracts. I think I'm happy to talk about it a little more in the Q&A as well, because to me this is fundamental in the way to the success of parking management. We've done extensive outreach with multiple stakeholders, including MLAs, MCD, resident welfare associations, and also organized a public exhibition in a car-free event in the neighborhood. And we found very interesting things, because we really emphasized walkability and accessibility. And when we asked people to vote, right, on what kind of streets they would like in their neighborhood, the choice is clear. This is what they want, but they also want parking, right? So this is that kind of, I think, this kind of challenge when we also work with local communities. Just, I think, some of where we are, again, recently did some walks with the Municipal Corporation of Delhi and are in the process of organizing consultations with the community. I'll just come back to what Abhijit said in the beginning, right? I think I call it the 1G approach, which was focused on increasing parking supply. We do see fragmented on-street parking management, typically around markets and commercial areas. And we're really talking about how we can shift this to looking at an area-based approach in order to align and optimize transport investments. Thank you.
Thanks, Sonal. I think it was great insights. I think also coming from the ground and linking up both the walking narrative as well. I think you approached it extensively even through that, which is great to see. So we've got about half an hour. What I'm going to do is I'll just share my screen with the questions that are there. I have taken some notes. I think some things have already been addressed, but what we could do is if you all can sort of take one question or one or two questions to address each of you guys, even if you want to come in for a similar question, it's fine. If there's a different perspective, I will share my screen right away. That would be great, as well as maybe leave around the last 10 minutes for everyone else also to ask if there are other questions. So what I've put down here is, I think the whole question about looking at trip attractors, that was a very, very big issue as well for what we found through walkability. Yeah, it's coming on. It'll come on. Okay. So I'm just going to jump into the first question till it sort of comes on. But trip attractors being one of the main questions that we're looking at. as well as them being located on minor roads, which are really the smallest roads that we have. There is no space, there's insufficient space even for a footpath as well as your carriageway. So forget about parking, right? And here's where the majority of, I think also the discussion of the linkage to master plan comes from here, because you locate certain kinds of uses on roads of certain width, or because you have a particular use in a master plan, you fix the road widths to be able to address that. We haven't had one for a very long time, so none of those rules are being followed, right? So I think the fact that there is no space becomes very, very important. I think some of them were addressed in terms of the area-based approach, but it'll be great for someone to speak about that. Reorganizing space for parking, pedestrian infrastructure. I think all three of you will address this, so I'm going to not sort of get into that. Temporal parking, it'll be great if you all can speak about it, especially linked to religious institutions, educational institutions. I feel, Sonal, you may have come across this a lot more in your study since it is so grounded locally. That would be great to answer. Parking policy, again, I think it's from the perspective of how that plays a role, because in Bangalore, we have found it to have addressed the issue of parking from a very, for a very small part of the roads that are there. A large component of the roads are left out. So just trying to understand how that plays a role, especially when you don't have any, even, we don't have a parking master plan, we had area level plans. One other thing that we've been, it'll be good to know is, have there been any successes where things have been implemented and plans have been implemented in terms of removal of encroachments? Maybe the urban lab perspective, since you'll have looked at multiple cities where this has been addressed. Also looking at taxi, residential parking, pricing when it comes to this. So I'm just sort of placing all of this here. But between y'all, if you'd like to go in for it, Abhijit, maybe you first.
Yeah, sure. Which one do you want me to go first?
I think maybe if you can talk about just the role parking policy and master plans play from, especially, I mean, you are familiar with the Bangalore perspective as well, right? So I think translating that, yes, Surat was a planned one, and you said just delving into a little bit of even the conversation around that, it's not really linked to a master plan. Then how do we start looking at it? Almost like saying, where do we start, right? When we have a parking policy, but that itself is not doing the entirety of the role what needs to be.
Yeah. Okay. So see, a policy is not mandatory or statutory in nature. It is only going to give you a direction. It will also give you strategies that you can use to manage your parking. And a master plan is a statutory document. Most master plans, how they address parking is like this. They will simply say that if you are building you're building apartments of say 3-bedroom, 3 BHK, you need to provide 1.5 parking or 2 parking. So this is all basically grounded in development control regulations, which will tell you how much off-street parking must be created. Right? And now that actually is creating a huge problem, the way master plans are determining. Nobody knows on what basis are we saying are coming up with these standards. I've talked to planners in Ahmedabad, in Surat. Nobody knows. It's historical, it's legacy. And every 10 years when you revise your master plan, you say, oh, I need more parking. So now you now you're going to 2 basements. Now you're talking about 3 basements. Yeah. So in a way, master plans are actually, in the way the regulations are written, are actually destroying cities.
Right.
What it is also
but do you think is this but do you think this is also linked to the fact that we haven't, or we are not preempting it in the first place of how our cities are developing? Or is it because if it is so redundant and still being applied, and yes, we are seeing it being applied left, right, and center, in fact. So where do you think, like, or why do you think that is so, and what do you think can actually sort of fix this this approach, of taking this approach, or the casual nature in which it's been taken every time?
I mean, probably people are just not aware enough of what this is causing. And in India, definitely we are not still moving on from this. We're still focusing on this. But there are enough these examples around the world where they're moving from parking minimums to parking maximums. Also moving from reducing parking requirements along transit corridors, which has happened in a few cases in India, where along BRT or metro corridors, for example, Ahmedabad tried this. They said you can actually, they have a certain parking minimum, but said on mass transit corridors, you can reduce parking minimums by 25%. Okay, so that is about off-street parking. Now, on-street parking is not really addressed in master plans.
Okay.
At the most, what master plans will tell you is that you can have commercial development on ground plus first floor, even in a residential area, if the right of way is 18 meters or more. This is classic way of getting master plans.
Yeah.
Okay, but it does not address parking here. Now, the issue is like this. Mixed use parking, mixed land use actually causes parking issues.
Yeah.
But mixed land use is also recommended because it means that you can actually have you can have shorter trips. Right? So in fact, I believe you can approach the problem from the other way and say that if we provide great walking infrastructure, many of the short trips on motorized vehicles can actually go down. So you can actually reduce the need for parking if you provide better walking infrastructure.
Fair enough.
But the master plan does not get into that detail at all. It does not talk about on-street parking or parking in the public domain. It only tries to regulate off-street parking. Okay, so I have also not heard of case studies outside India, and maybe Sonal can come in there, where they have approached the parking, on-street parking through regulatory or statutory master plans. Sonal, you have any idea?
No, not, I mean, except that Japan has banned on-street parking, but they have very, very good enforcement, at least in some of their smaller streets, they have, but they have very good enforcement. So, yeah.
Yeah, now what you could also do is, not as part of the master plan, but because the urban local body and the traffic police and the police basically have the power to enforce this through gazette notifications.
Right.
So you can actually say that any street, and this is what was said in Surat also, I didn't get into the details, but Surat policy did say that if the street was 15 meters and below, only parking on only one side will be permitted.
Right.
If it was 12 meters and below, then no on-street parking will be permitted. To make it enforceable, the police commissioner has to come out with a notification.
Yeah.
But then it becomes legal, or rather illegal to park on such streets. So the master plan doesn't work here. It's more of coming out with notifications.
Fair enough. I think if we can jump, I'll sort of take it to the Coimbatore example and Reashma, to you to be able to also understand. I think from the perspective of Coimbatore, where you had the policy already in place, right? They were already, that was getting reviewed at the time the project was starting, and then they wanted to look at this area. Can you sort of talk a little bit about how, because it is also, again, a much smaller area that they looked at, and to my understanding, it's also to look at learnings from this area that will again reinform. So it's a pilot of sorts for the city, right? Can you sort of give us a little insight into also how the government is driving this whole thing, their flexibility in terms of, you know, all of these insights that you're getting from ground and how they are sort of adopting that back in? Since we are talking about the overarching policy level stuff, maybe that could be interesting to understand.
Yeah. So, city of Coimbatore, before doing their, by the time we were discussing about it, the policy was in draft shape and there were been discussions regarding that. So it was not like completely, it was out for anyone to see it and learn things from it. But we were being part of many of these policy discussions and other things. And the city also had prepared an NMT action plan. So which they were looking at, the city level, and they were trying to identify identify the corridors which can be potentially utilized for walking, prioritizing walking and cycling. And their whole intention was slightly like, more into addressing the issue of parking. It was not integrated with, developing your cities, or, make that kind of an urban development in such a way that, you address it. It was more of trying to, it was an isolated approach, I would say, for the city to tackle this issue. But in order to do that, but they also wanted to ensure it when they are doing it, it's not a standalone approaches for roads. That is why they have taken the area level, so that at least that 4 square kilometer area which they are considering it, because you are defining your street network over there. And whatever the other questions which you have raised over here, like you're asking about how do you take care of residential, taxi pricing, other things which you are talking about it. So their first priority was like, let's define street, and in terms of its street utilization for its space, improving the walkability, at the same time understanding the parking and addressing the parking. And this has extended because of the, if you recall, like Racecourse which I shown, it is one of the landmark project for the city. And it is a very mixed land use now. It was earlier, you see the land use cover change from residentials to, it is coming more to a mixed land use, and then to a larger of the commercial. So many of the residential buildings are now converted to the commercial spaces and other things. Because of that, cities were getting a lot of comments from residents saying like, this is my street, but I don't have privacy. It's all the time vehicles are coming and parking. Those were the major issues. So they wanted to see like this kind of a development, mixed development, how do we address? And they wanted to, make it through like more of an area level plans by identifying the streets and regulating the space with the walking and parking. This was truly the step they have taken it. They were also saying like, the one good part of the city is that through this process, they wanted to ensure that walking walkways, that is been getting
also improved.
Yeah. So that was the first and basic level in which the city has done. And this was also a very small area in which they have tried in. So that was one of the strategy. And the second thing, coming to the residential, since you've given me the opportunity, I just wanted to link that point. So there have been a lot of restaurants. You are asking like, how do you link typically to trip attractors? I'm not talking about the, in terms of the plans and other things, but they identified the current on-ground issues with respect to like, the trip attractors and what kind of modes, the delivery vehicles. These have been the quite a lot of challenges. All right. So, they kind of told us like, be integrate these kinds of requirements also into your plan. So that, it's just not reflect as parking only we are addressing. All these activities which are happening in that neighborhood also finds a space for it, because the entire 2.5 kilometer, one circle of this race course, in one side complete walking, the other side is complete shopping, and it's been loaded with a lot of eateries and other things. So they wanted to carve out spaces for each of its purpose, linking activity to the parking. That is what they have been trying to do at the first place. And when it comes to residential zones of those areas, neighborhood, they also wanted us to look into it and identify like, how do we define residential zones? So we mapped like what is a household, the vehicle ownership at the household level, and seeing like, how much they are able to park it and how much is the excess, which is that always be there on the road, right? And identify some stretches for the residential allocation plans. These were the other extents which also has been carried out. So at present, we are actually doing a parking management action plan with Kumta and Chennai for Anna Nagar neighborhood. And in there, all these elements like school zone, hospitals, residential, all these have been taken care, even TOD policy. So you will apply this bit and pieces like school zone. You define the school zone. When I'm thinking about parking, apply your school zone policies there. Like you don't provide, like make that as a parking free, provide only pickup drop off zones. So that has been coming. So your, neighborhood, that land use, everything is getting improved in terms of
So when you go into the plan making itself, you have to get everything in. That's where it will all tie in when you look at the
so the
implementation of it.
area level plan is actually now integrating all other plans, TOD plans. There are many metro stations. Like, how do you plan it? Like, how do you make the IPT? How do you take bus stands together? So those kinds of things are also getting integrated. So I think that is something we can learn much better through area level plans.
Yeah. I think that's a good shift also to Sonal. I think one of the things that I also found very interesting is the aspect of safety of footpath parking, creating these dark zones that you also mentioned. Also looking at this entire ground up information that you collected in order to be able to influence and inform, right? When the surveys that you've done with people who are parking, why they're parking. And I think that conscious shift to be able to looking at the modal change, to say what is going to stop you from parking more. I would like to sort of pull that in and pull in the sort of conversation around saying that when I redistribute the demand at an area level, there is enough parking. I just want you to sort of speak a little bit about both those narratives and how they are sort of coming together, especially when you start negotiating it with the perspective that I now have a metro here, but still I find these kind of behavior patterns, right, that haven't shifted. So I think if you could just delve a little more on your insights from that.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Sobia, I haven't understood your question. Can you help me?
What I'm trying to say is basically you looked at multiple things. You looked at now how people are saying that there is a pattern that people are following, the people that are parking there. And you did those surveys and you did all this perspective of also who's coming from walking, all of that. Then you also looked at it from a metro on. You looked at the whole behavior pattern because you said, okay, there is a public transport mode. Why aren't people sort of ending up taking that mode, right? And also then looking at the entire aspect of this demand at an area level, right? Saying that if I look at the whole area, there is actually enough space to park, but people are not using it, right? But to my mind, some of them are slightly contradicting, saying that, okay, there is a demand perspective. There is also parking available. Now, how do I make people shift to one or the other? So I just want to understand both, because you have spoken to government authorities as well, right? As well as people as well, to understand whether this shift will happen. And I'm going to even drive in the whole thing of whether it's commercial areas, whether it's residential areas, all of that, right, into this narrative saying that there is demand, but no, I want to park right in front of my doorstep, right? And that doorstep most evidently will not have space, right? So I think if you can sort of look at the two sides of the coin, saying that there's space, but I don't want to park in that space, and the fact that there is public transport, but I don't want to use public transport, a little more into that sort of narrative.
Yeah. So how have we been trying to communicate with different audiences in order to enable this shift, if it will be as well? And like I said, we are at that stage where we are going to begin consultations as well. So we're really waiting on MCD to facilitate that. But one of the main arguments that we were making to the business association, because the thing is that the business owners and the employees were the long-term users on the market stretch, right? And the big case was that, was there a way that we could have some kind of service, either a valet service that would take their vehicles to the nearby MLCP and bring it back when they needed it. These are people who are not willing to walk too much, to be very, very honest. Okay, so the MLCP is not more than 200 meters away, but they don't want to walk. The employees may somehow walk. So that was one. The second thing that we are also exploring is some of them are actually paying a monthly fee, a fixed monthly fee directly to the operator to park on the street. Okay, so again, I mean, and these require a lot of discussions. And so one of the ways, and again, so this will require MCD, parking operator, and the business association, multiple people to come together to agree on a pilot. But one of the things we are also exploring is, instead of a fixed monthly fee, which is about 1,200 rupees a month, what if they were to pay per use in the MLCP, let's say at 5 rupees an hour? We did the calculations and we found that they would end up paying 1,000 rupees a month, even if they parked, let's say 22 days a month. So there is, so on one hand is that then the parking becomes available for your customers, right? On the street. You pay less as a business owner because you don't have to pay a fixed monthly fee. You pay based on use, and you also pay a subsidized rate, right? So I think all of these arguments can be made, but we really need to understand what perspective they come from. And I will just say one thing, right? Perhaps one is where we are in terms of, you know, the parking scenario. We are in a context where most people are not paying for parking. Okay.
Yeah.
So and therefore, what is it that we can do, starting conservatively even, but begin to inculcate a culture of paying for parking, right? I think is important. So are the fees, because even if you see, the fees may not be high initially, right? But they can be increased incrementally. And I think these are the ways that we may need to discuss and arrive at solutions which may not necessarily achieve our goals at the first step, right? So paying nothing for parking to paying 40 rupees an hour can, you know, so I think that's where we are. So we're actually exploring.
Yeah, so I think at the heart of it, which I think both from the Coimbatore experience that Reashma also suggested, as well as what you are suggesting, and I'm really hearing this loud and clear, that having these discussions and negotiations are a very big part of actually the implementation, which is not really happening everywhere. You know, making the plan is probably much simpler than actually going into this, making everyone agree.
I'll just be honest. I think the preparation of plan is step one.
Yeah.
Okay. And it means that it is the start of beginning negotiations.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I think, like, I'm going into a few of the questions. I think the question of residential areas, definitely people assume they can park on the street, has come in. Again, it's about pricing and enforcement. We know we are very, very weak with that. I know in Bangalore also, we've not had much success with pricing, even though it's been privatized. Still, you know, in some places where the tender shore roads have come, that has also failed, and the BBMP is still trying to sort of find that. I think the other question that I'm taking, Ankit, I'm taking the questions that are in the chat. So if anyone has questions, can put it up in the chat as well. I have another question here from Sangami, taking that in on street parking on street and commercial areas. Can either of you all sort of weigh in a bit on that? Loading, unloading zones, priorities for providing parking space for large vehicles, commercial vehicles, buses, vans, that kind of thing. Maybe any experiences that either of you all have, if you want to step in.
I can go in, but I'm also happy for. I know this is also in the Delhi parking rules, but for loading and unloading, and even for taxis, because I believe someone also put taxis and so on, is that I think I think it's important to demarcate those, and they can also be considered free for the first 30 minutes, after which they can be charged, so that you allow for loading and unloading of goods as well. In our neighborhood, we had a slightly different problem, which was long-term parking by freight vehicles. But in this case, that is one thing that could be considered.
So, I mean, we actually see with especially like taxis and stuff, right? They overtake residential areas all over the place, like in Bangalore as well. So you find that quite extensively, that they end up coming and parking there at their stops. Also, do you think timing is a thing when you look at loading, unloading? Because I know like a lot of places abroad do that, where you have an early morning time to do loading and unloading, and it's just not allowed during daytimes.
Yeah, I think loading and unloading you can manage by timings, but with this increasing e-mobility and deliveries happening during the day, that has also become an issue. For where will the Swiggies and Genies and delivery vans park? I don't have an answer, but in many cities, what is done is where you have your parking, some of the parking bays are marked as spaces for loading and unloading. You need to have demarcation, and I think then you need to get back to design, your street design.
Yeah.
You need to go back to having design guidelines, maybe templates that are then being used by the local body.
Right.
Market, but I know easy answers to this.
Yeah. Yeah. Any other thoughts anyone has? I think we are at 6:59, so I don't want to drag ourselves. I think the presentations itself was so enriching. We will be putting the recording up also with your permission, because we had a lot of people also write to us say, can you keep the recording? I know it's a very interesting topic to a lot of people. Any other last closing thoughts? Abhijit, Reashma, Sonal?
I just want to say that
I think one thing sorry.
Ankit, one sec, Ankit.
Okay,
yeah,
go for it, go for it.
No, so I just shared on the chat also that because this kind of question keeps coming up about linking it to the master plan. And I've been thinking about this for a long time. How do you make street design guidelines mandatory? The street design are again guidelines. I mean, it's not mandatory to follow them. They are simply suggestions on what can be done.
Yeah.
But in a way, leaving it open to interpretation. And I'm saying, can we start having templates or street designs in the master plan document itself? When you talk about road net, and then you say, okay, these are my hierarchies. And okay, I say 40-meter road in the residential area. These are the 3 ways in which you can design it. Put it right there in the master plan document itself. Then, till the time somebody objects, start enforcing that and say, okay, this is part of my master plan. I can't do it. It's statutory.
Yeah.
If I may, I think the way they tried to negotiate it in, I think Mumbai's DP long back was saying that a certain share of your right of way, right? Instead of the street design guideline, because I think a lot of concern with engineers was flexibility of the road. But so another way, but also building on what Abhijit is saying is, what if there is a share of the right of way that either restricts space for vehicles or protects space for footpaths and
pedestrians.
And see, ultimately, as you pointed out in Bangalore, and it's the case in Ahmedabad also, you build footpaths, which are standard 3-meter wide footpaths. The commissioner in Ahmedabad is pushing for 3-meter footpaths, but ultimately everybody is parking on those footpaths. So after a point, even if you have a master plan which says ki so much share or a guideline or a template, ultimately it will come down to enforcing it. So behavior change will happen through pricing and enforcement both.
And I think that we are at a very nascent stage as cities, right?
A lot more. Have half a minute more, I'll just share what happened in Ahmedabad before COVID, where because of a high court intervention which said that you need to, and ironically it was for decongesting streets and having fast flow. The high court stepped in and asked the police commissioner of Ahmedabad and the municipal commissioner to do something about it. So they were given a notice. So both of them got together and said, we ban parking on all arterial roads. Even if it is designed as a parking, we ban it on all roads. And next day they started enforcing it. So they had teams going all over. They also designated certain open plots as off-street parking so that people had an opportunity. Point being that as soon as they started enforcing it, we did not have protests in Ahmedabad. What we had was people suddenly feeling, oh, the roads are emptier, much traffic seems to be better. Now, people changed behavior. They started doing Uber, Ola, or business establishments started having valet parking, which could then take cars into the basement, which were actually underutilized. So over a period of 6 months, just because the High Court pushed the commissioners, both the commissioners, they got around doing something about it. Things were much better. Then COVID happened and everything went for it fast. Now nothing like that happens here. But for about 6 months, this worked quite well. A lot of press coverage and a lot of appreciation that, okay, now finally we don't have this parking happening. There were bad examples also. For example, the police said no parking on the carriageway. But parking on footpath is permitted.
Footpath is fine.
So we had some bad impacts of that. But enforcement did change behavior. That's the point.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Ankit, do you want to say?
No, I mean, I think I forgot my question now. But like, I just wanted to say how much I really appreciate the density of information that you all have been doing. Like, to an observer who hasn't really gone into parking as much, I was surprised with actually the fact that I think, Abhijit, you probably mentioned that these, like, to me, these were not just looking at parking plans, they were literally looking at street designs. Because you are literally gathering so much of information from the spatial analysis, land use, like there's so much happening. And like literally, I mean, from Sonal, I mean, your perspective, it was quite literal that you were also looking at footpath quite directly. So bacha kya? I mean, you pretty much, like, you know, like I'm just saying, like, if you're calling it parking, but we are designing for the whole street. And even the fact that you were saying 3 cars and like there might be a space for a vendor. Like it's that so much work is being done. And then if at this point we're able to incorporate zones, vending zones, and even for trees and etc., it's just like one step away. Because like hawking is the second largest issue in terms of encroachment for us. And so I'm really also like noticing that there is the strand of the vending zones that can be tied up, because I mean, to both of your plans, unloading zones were a part of it as well. And so it's like just one step away we can solve for the next issue essentially. So just really appreciate like everything that you all have shared, and yeah, it was good.
Yes. So I think we're at 7:05. Thank you so much everyone for joining us. I know people have dropped out, but it has really been very enriching a conversation. Like Ankit's mentioned, next one we are delving deep into vending. So we hope to also understand how and where we can start with respect to that. I think great insights. Would love to sort of continue this conversation once we share the video out and see what next steps can also come forth from this. And great to meet everyone here, the speakers as well. I know some of us we've met for the first time, but we've all been following each other's work. So really great to touch base. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting us. Thanks.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Sobia.
Bye.